At the company party, I grabbed the mic and announced, "Ever wonder why your boss told my cheating wife to shave her kitty?" She collapsed in tears as everyone stood in shock, because tonight she was supposed to be a gift for Mr. Benson. Turns out this company encourages employees to sleep with clients to secure deals, even if it destroys marriages. It was supposed to be just another company event, an opportunity to celebrate the successes of the past year, strengthen relationships, and enjoy some much-needed downtime. The annual gala, held at L'Indu Prestige, a luxurious hotel in the heart of Paris, was the perfect backdrop for business networking among the elite of the finance world. A night of fine champagne, handshakes, and business deals in the making. But for me, Victor Duval, an executive in the finance department of Capital Con, tonight would not be about celebration. It would be the night I uncovered the ugly truth about the woman I thought I loved and the company I had worked my entire life to build. As I walked through the gilded doors of the hotel, I couldn't help but admire the grandeur of the place. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, warm glow across the room, and the sound of laughter and polite conversation filled the air. Colleagues stood in tight circles, exchanging pleasantries, and clients were whining and dining like royalty. But despite the festive atmosphere, my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about Isabel. She had been acting distant lately, cold in a way that didn't seem like her. For months now I had sensed something was off. There were subtle clues, forgotten details, whispered conversations, late nights at the office, and her increasing reluctance to share anything personal with me. At first, I chalked it up to the pressures of work, but as the weeks passed, my unease grew, and tonight I could feel it more than ever. Isabel was stunning as always. Her platinum blonde hair was styled into an elegant updo, and her dress, a sleek, ruby red number, accentuated her figure perfectly. But there was something in her eyes, something hollow, as if she wasn't fully present. I spotted her across the room, chatting animatedly with Mr. Benson, one of our most influential and wealthy clients. I'd met him a few times before, a man in his mid-50s, sharp in his tailored suits, with a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. He was the kind of man who had everything: power, money, and influence. And for some reason, he seemed to have Isabel's undivided attention. Curious and unsettled, I watched them from a distance. There was no doubt in my mind that something was off about their conversation. The way they stood too close, how Mr. Benson's laughter seemed to linger a little too long after Isabel's words. I couldn't explain it, but the knot in my stomach tightened. My gut told me something was happening. I turned my attention to the rest of the party, but my mind kept drifting back to Isabel and Mr. Benson. What were they talking about? Why was she avoiding me? It had been a long week leading up to the event. I had been working late into the evenings, and while Isabel had been home, something was different. Her coldness was palpable, her phone was glued to her hand, and she had begun making excuses to avoid spending time with me. One evening, I arrived home earlier than usual. Isabel was in the shower, and the house was eerily quiet. As I walked into the living room, my eyes were drawn to the coffee table where her phone sat face up. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself walking over to it. It was unlocked, her fingerprint scan never failed, and I had access to her phone since the beginning of our marriage. I'd never used it to spy on her before, but tonight something told me I needed to. I picked it up and glanced at the latest messages. The first one caught my eye. It was from an unknown number. "Tonight we'll seal the deal, won't we? Make sure you're ready for him." My heart skipped a beat. Who was this? Who was she talking to? I scrolled down, my hands trembling, as I read the rest of the conversation. Isabel had been planning something with Mr. Benson. Her words were subtle, coded, but unmistakable. "I'll do whatever it takes. I know this deal means everything. If it's what's needed, I'll play the part." My stomach churned as I pieced together the unsettling truth. My wife was being coerced into something that went beyond simple business negotiations. But as the realization hit, I also felt something else: betrayal. She wasn't just dealing with the pressure of her job, she was being used. Worse still, she was willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant sacrificing our marriage. I knew I couldn't sit idly by any longer. I needed to confront her, to understand what was going on, to hear her side of the story. That night, after the gala, I waited until she came home. The silence between us was unbearable. I stood in the living room, my arms crossed, trying to control the fury that simmered inside me. "Isabel," I began, my voice low but steady. "We need to talk." She froze. Her eyes shifted, but she didn't say anything. I could tell she was already bracing herself. "I saw the messages. I know what's been going on," I continued, my anger rising now. "You've been sleeping with Mr. Benson, haven't you? Just like they told you to?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then her shoulders slumped, and she sank into the couch, her hands covering her face. "I didn't want you to." "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Victor, you don't understand. It was the only way." "They promised me that if I helped him, we would close the deal and you'd get the promotion you've been working for." I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't just being manipulated, she had willingly participated in this sordid arrangement. "Who's they?" "Isabel," I demanded. "Who's making you do this?" "Who are you letting control your life?" Her eyes welled with tears. "The company, Victor. It's all part of the game. They told me it was how business worked. They said that if I wanted to succeed, if we wanted to keep our jobs, this was what we had to do." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. The company I had devoted myself to, the very people I had trusted, were responsible for pushing my wife into this. The next few days were a whirlwind. My mind was consumed with thoughts of revenge. I couldn't just let this slide. Isabel's betrayal was one thing, but the entire system that encouraged this behavior had to be exposed. I took everything I had learned and began investigating. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. The company's culture, as glamorous as it seemed, was riddled with corruption. Employees, especially women, were being coerced into using their bodies as bargaining chips to secure high-value contracts. The executives didn't just turn a blind eye to it, they encouraged it. It became clear that Mr. Benson was not the only one. The entire corporate structure from the top down was built on exploitation, and Isabel wasn't the only victim. She was just one of many. I couldn't let this go unnoticed, and as much as it pained me to do so, I knew I had to confront Isabel. There would be no reconciliation. There could be no going back, but I would expose the truth for what it was. Not just for my own peace of mind, but for the sake of everyone who had been affected by this culture of deceit. The company gala was the perfect opportunity. As much as I dreaded seeing Isabel, again, this event provided the perfect setting to confront her and those who had been part of this scheme. I had spent the last few days preparing, gathering evidence, researching the company's history, and talking to other employees who had been through similar experiences. It was time to make a move. The tension in the air that night felt different from any other year. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the turning point of my life. As I watched Isabel laughing with Mr. Benson, her hand gently resting on his arm, the anger I had been holding back for so long started to boil over. She had been lying to me for months, using her body as currency, and I was done. I knew it would be a delicate moment. If I didn't act quickly, Isabel's betrayal would continue to stain everything. This couldn't just be about her. It had to be about the entire corrupt system that had fueled this. The event was held in one of the most opulent ballrooms I had ever seen, an elaborate space that made everyone seem more important than they really were. The employees mingled, drinks in hand, making superficial conversation while the executives watched from their high pedestals. Isabel was at the center of it, playing her part to perfection. But tonight, her role would be exposed. I made my way to the stage. The microphone was sitting there, waiting for someone to speak. I took a deep breath, preparing for the moment that would change everything. It was time for the truth to come out. With a single motion, I grabbed the mic. The entire room fell silent, and every eye turned to me. I could feel the weight of their gazes, but I focused on Isabel, who was now staring at me with wide, panicked eyes. She had no idea what was coming. "Ever wonder why your boss told my wife to shave her kitty?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. There was a moment of stunned silence. It wasn't just the shock of the words, but the way I had said them, like a man who had just had enough, who had been pushed to the edge. Isabel's face drained of color, her eyes wide with shock and fear. I could see her shaking slightly, but there was nowhere to run. "Tonight, you were supposed to be a gift for Mr. Benson, and let me tell you, you aren't the first woman he's gotten his hands on. The truth is, this company encourages employees to sleep with clients in order to close deals, even if it means destroying marriages." The room was dead silent, the weight of my words settling in. I could hear the murmur of disbelief ripple through the crowd, and I knew this was only the beginning. Isabel collapsed, tears streaming down her face. She fell to her knees, her hands trembling. It was a heartbreaking sight, but it didn't faze me, not anymore. She had chosen this path, and now she would face the consequences. The aftermath was everything I had expected and more. The company's executives were furious, but not for the reasons I had hoped. They were furious that I had exposed them. They didn't care about the human cost of their system. They only cared about preserving their reputation and maintaining their twisted version of business as usual. But as for Isabel, she couldn't hide from what had happened. She had never intended for anyone to find out, and now that her dirty secrets were out in the open, she was forced to confront the consequences. The days following the gala were filled with endless phone calls, meetings, and accusations. I was summoned to the CEO's office, where I was given a cold, scathing lecture on how I had ruined the company's reputation. They threatened to sue me, to blacklist me, to ruin my career. But I didn't care. I had made a choice. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for all the other employees who had been forced into these corrupt deals. I wasn't going to let this go. It was time for a change, and I would do whatever it took to bring the truth to light. Isabel, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. She had taken a leave of absence after the public humiliation, retreating into her own shame. I didn't hear from her for days, and I didn't care. My focus was on one thing now, exposing the truth. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of what had happened at the gala. It was a scandal too big to ignore. Slowly but surely, the details began to emerge. Other women, other men, all tangled in the web of corruption that had been the backbone of the company's success for years. Employees began speaking out, revealing stories of coercion, manipulation, and exploitation. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but once the floodgates opened, there was no turning back. I was contacted by journalists, lawyers, and former employees who had been too scared to speak out before. Together, we built a case that would eventually bring the company down. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about righting a wrong that had festered for too long, and I would be the one to expose it all. The final confrontation came, faster than I had anticipated. Isabel had returned to the office, but she was a different person. She wasn't the woman I had once loved. She was a shell of that woman, broken and bitter, unsure of her place in a world that had been turned upside down. She approached me in the hallway one morning, her eyes red from crying. "Victor," she whispered, "I don't know what to say. I was wrong. I was caught up in everything and I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't just cheat on me, Isabel," I replied, my voice cold. "You were part of a system that destroyed people's lives. You were complicit in the harm it caused. You betrayed me in the worst possible way." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I thought I was doing what was necessary to survive." I shook my head. "Survival doesn't come at the cost of others, Isabel. Not when it's your marriage, your dignity, your soul, and definitely not when it destroys lives in the process." There was a long silence between us, and for a moment, I almost thought I could forgive her. But the reality was different. I couldn't undo what had been done, and neither could she. In the months that followed, the company crumbled. Legal battles ensued. Executives were ousted. Mr. Benson, along with several other high-ranking officials, was brought to trial for his role in the corruption. The company was forced to pay millions in damages, and new policies were put in place to prevent such exploitation from continuing. As for Isabel, I never saw her again. She disappeared from the scene, leaving behind a trail of regrets and a marriage in ruins. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, looking out over the Paris skyline, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had avenged myself, but it came at a cost I couldn't have predicted. In the end, I had won, but I had lost something far more precious than just a job, a wife, or even my reputation. I've come to learn that revenge, while sweet, is never as satisfying as one imagines. The price is too high, the consequences too far-reaching. But sometimes when the system is broken, and when the truth is so painful to swallow, it is the only option left. As I looked out the window, I whispered to myself, the truth always finds a way to come to light, no matter how deep it's buried. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to Lauren's story. I've noticed that over 80% of you watch these stories but aren't subscribed yet. One simple click helps bring you more powerful tales just like this. By subscribing, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community that values deep, meaningful storytelling. Let's continue exploring these heartfelt journeys together. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our next gripping story.